December 1968. A quiet lover's lane on the outskirts of Vallejo, California. Two young people sit in a parked car on Lake Herman Road. Within minutes, they would become the first confirmed victims of a predator who would terrorize an entire state. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found evidence of a cold, deliberate act. The Solano County Sheriff's Office began what would become one of the longest unsolved cases in American criminal history. No one knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. The person responsible would soon reach out, not to confess, but to boast. He would call himself the Zodiac. The Zodiac killer's true identity remains unknown to this day. What investigators pieced together over decades was a psychological profile of someone who craved power, control, and, above all, attention. Behavioral analysts have long suggested the Zodiac was likely a white male, possibly in his late 20s or 30s during the late 1960s. He reportedly demonstrated knowledge of cryptography, suggesting some level of education or self-study. Witnesses who encountered the Zodiac at various scenes described a stocky man of average height, sometimes wearing glasses, but descriptions varied, making a definitive composite difficult for investigators to establish. Psychologists have noted that the Zodiac's behavior was consistent with a narcissistic personality, someone who derived satisfaction not just from the acts themselves, but from the public fear and media frenzy that followed. Unlike many serial offenders, the Zodiac appeared to operate across multiple jurisdictions deliberately. This fragmented the investigation across several police departments, a reality that may have been part of his strategy. What made the Zodiac uniquely terrifying was his willingness to communicate directly with the press and police. He seemed to view the entire Bay Area as his audience, and himself as the star of a dark performance. The confirmed attacks attributed to the Zodiac began in December 1968 on Lake Herman Road in Vallejo. Two young victims, David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were found by passing motorists. Approximately 7 months later, in July 1969, another attack occurred at Blue Rock Springs Park, also in Vallejo. Darlene Ferrin, 22, did not survive. Michael Mageau, 19, was critically injured, but lived to describe the attacker. Shortly after the Blue Rock Springs attack, a man called the Vallejo Police Department and claimed responsibility for both incidents. The caller spoke in a calm, measured tone, providing details only the perpetrator could have known. In August 1969, letters arrived at 3 Bay Area newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each contained 1/3 of a cryptographic cipher, along with a demand for publication. The first cipher, now known as the Z-8, was solved within a week by a Salinas schoolteacher named Donald Harden and his wife Betty. The decoded message revealed disturbing claims, but did not contain the killer's true identity, despite his promise. On September 27, 1969, the Zodiac struck again at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Brian Hartnell survived the attack and provided investigators with a description. Cecilia Shepard, 22, did not survive. The attacker had worn a distinctive hooded costume bearing the now iconic crosshair symbol. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, a taxi driver named Paul Stein was killed in San Francisco's Presidio Heights neighborhood. This attack marked a departure. It occurred in an urban setting, and witnesses got a closer look at the suspect. In total, the Zodiac claimed responsibility for as many as 37 victims in his letters, though investigators have confirmed 5 deaths and 2 survivors across 4 known attacks. The true scope of his crimes remains a matter of debate among researchers. The investigation into the Zodiac killings was hampered from the start by jurisdictional fragmentation. Vallejo Police, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and the San Francisco Police Department each handled separate attacks, and information sharing was limited. Inspector David Toschi and his partner, Inspector William Armstrong of the SFPD, became the lead investigators following the Paul Stein case. Toschi would dedicate years of his career to pursuing the Zodiac, becoming synonymous with the case itself. The Zodiac's letters became a crucial evidence stream. Over the course of several years, he sent an estimated 20 or more communications to newspapers and police. Each was analyzed for handwriting, fingerprints, and linguistic patterns. Fingerprint evidence recovered from one of the Zodiac's letters and from Paul Stein's taxicab was compared against thousands of suspects. But forensic technology of the era had significant limitations, and no definitive match was ever confirmed. One of the most tantalizing pieces of evidence was the Zodiac's second major cipher, known as the Z340. Sent in November 1969, this cipher resisted all attempts at decryption for over 50 years, baffling professional and amateur code breakers alike. Over the years, investigators developed a list of more than 2,500 suspects. Among the most prominent was Arthur Lee Allen, a Vallejo resident identified by investigators as a person of interest in the early 1970s. Allen denied involvement and was never charged. Despite circumstantial connections, DNA evidence collected from Zodiac letter stamps did not match Allen's profile. Allen passed away in 1992 without ever being formally accused. The case remained open. Unlike most cases in this series, there was no dramatic arrest, no handcuffs, no confession. The Zodiac killer was never apprehended. His letters simply stopped arriving in the mid-1970s, and the trail went cold. But the case never truly died. In December 2020, a team of private codebreakers, David Oranchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eyck, finally cracked the Z340 cipher after 51 years. The FBI confirmed their solution. The decoded Z340 contained taunting language, but, disappointingly, no name. The Zodiac had once again denied investigators the satisfaction of identification, even from beyond the assumed passage of decades. In 2021, a team called the Casebreakers publicly named Gary Francis Post as their suspect, citing alleged forensic evidence and personal connections. However, law enforcement agencies did not confirm this identification, and the claim remains disputed. Advances in genetic genealogy, the same technology that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018, have given investigators new hope. The FBI has stated that the Zodiac case remains open and actively investigated. If the Zodiac were alive during the period of his known crimes, he would likely be in his 80s or 90s today, or may have already passed. The possibility exists that his identity may never be conclusively established. There was no trial, no verdict, no sentencing. The Zodiac case stands as one of the most prominent failures of the American justice system, not for lack of effort, but because the evidence never converged on a single provable suspect. The jurisdictional fragmentation that plagued the original investigation has been cited by criminologists as a critical factor. Had a unified task force been formed earlier, investigators might have connected evidence more effectively. The case directly influenced changes in how California law enforcement agencies cooperate on serial cases. Multi-jurisdictional task forces became standard practice in subsequent decades, a reform born from the Zodiac's ability to exploit institutional gaps. For the families of David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein, the absence of justice has been a wound that time has never fully healed. Their loved ones deserve answers that have never come. Survivors Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell carried the weight of their experiences for the rest of their lives. Hartnell went on to become an attorney and has spoken publicly about the attack and its lasting impact on him. The Zodiac case reminds us that justice is not guaranteed, that some predators escape the systems designed to stop them, but it also reminds us that the pursuit of truth does not have an expiration date. The Zodiac killer case has become embedded in American cultural consciousness. Robert Graysmith's investigative books, published in the 1980s, brought renewed public attention and inspired David Fincher's acclaimed 2007 film. The case also transformed the field of amateur cryptanalysis. The Zodiac's ciphers inspired generations of code breakers to apply their skills to criminal cases, and the eventual cracking of the Z340 demonstrated the power of persistent civilian contribution. For criminologists, the Zodiac case remains a textbook example of how a perpetrator can exploit media, manipulate public fear, and weaponize institutional weaknesses. It reshaped how law enforcement thinks about serial crime communication. But beyond the cultural fascination, 5 real people lost their lives. They were young, full of promise, and taken without reason. David, Betty Lou, Darlene, Cecilia, and Paul. They are not characters in a mystery. They were someone's children, siblings, and friends. Somewhere, in a filing cabinet, a DNA database, or a yet unsolved cipher, the answer may still exist. The question is whether we will find it in time. Until then, the Zodiac remains what he always wanted to be, a mystery. More than 55 years have passed since the Zodiac's first confirmed attack. The case file remains open. The victims' families still wait. And somewhere, the truth still hides in plain sight. A new case drops every day. Subscribe so you never miss one.